Hi, I'm Bill Kessler. I want to tell you about my passion for Atlantic salmon. And in a way, it makes no sense at all. It's unpredictable. Much of the time you must reserve your fishing a year or more in advance, and the timing of the run, the conditions, water levels and temperatures can vary all over the place. And yes, it can be pretty expensive. There's a limited amount of water and lots of demand. But these are very special fish that will come to a dead drift dry fly like trout. They're returning to the rivers where they've evolved for over tens of thousands of years. And these fish are not planet aliens. They're home. A real affirmation of the natural world. And they're spectacular fish. In spectacular settings. This is the East Litsa on the Kola Peninsula in Russia. Norway. Sweden, Tweed in Scotland, the beautiful rivers of Iceland, the Margaree on Cape Breton, Quebec, New Brunswick, and my beloved crystal-clear rivers of the Gaspé Peninsula. This is the Bonaventure, where underwater visibility has been measured at more than 100 feet. This passion for the king of fish has been with us for a very long time. We can fish for them because they return from the sea into their natal streams with one purpose, to reproduce. They've traveled many thousands of miles to reach their destination after their time at sea. For some, it'll be their first time. Some may return to spawn multiple times. Typical spawning occurs from late October to December. Once they reach the spawning grounds and the timing is right, the hen digs a redd and spawning commences. Males compete to fertilize the eggs. She will deposit approximately 700 eggs per pound of her weight. That's 14,000 eggs for a 20-pound hen. And somewhere between 70 and 160 days, typically March or April, the eggs hatch as alevin, fry. The egg sac nourishes the fry for a couple of months. In early summer, at about 2.5 inches, the salmon, now a par, emerges from the gravel and begins to feed. The distinctive par marks serve as part of their camouflage. The par might spend as much as 8 years in fresh water. 5 is about average. At the end of his last growing season, he undergoes a process called smoltification. His caudal and pectoral fins become black. He becomes more streamlined and silver. At the cellular level, he undergoes a transformation that allows him to transition to saltwater. Migration to the sea typically happens at night, in April or May. This map shows the major migration routes at sea. Our smolts typically head to the Grand Banks, and then further north to the rich feeding grounds of the Davis Straits and along the coast of Greenland, along with many European salmon. There are magnetic particles in the salmon's lateral line that allows him to orient to the Earth's magnetic field. Think of it as his onboard compass. He also has a pineal window, a transparent covering on the top of his cranium that transmits information to his pineal organ. It gives him the capability to detect polarized light, and since polarized light can penetrate clouds, it helps him to know the exact location of the sun, even under fog and gray skies. As he travels primarily in the daylight, it's his primary navigation tool, his sextant, if you will. Additionally, the amount and duration of daylight gives him an accurate measure of the time of the year, so in essence he has an onboard calendar. The food supply, currents, and his onboard navigation system guides his feeding and his eventual return to his natal territory. He travels along the coast until he finally detects the chemical signature of his natal river. This is a grilse, which is typically male. He spent one winter at sea. SW signifies sea winter, the number of years that salmon overwinter at sea. After 2 years at sea is when most hens become sexually mature. Typically, 2 sea winter fish are between 7 and 18 pounds, but in some systems and years, they could be as large as 25 or 30 pounds. Some 3 sea winter salmon might be returning for their first time, but some might be repeat spawners. 4 sea winter salmon can easily be over 30 pounds, and some salmon may grow to be 20 years old and be over 50 pounds. Historically, salmon have been fished with wet flies. Generally, casts are downstream at about 45 degrees, but can vary a lot depending on the nature and the speed of the water. This illustration shows how an angler can methodically and completely cover a piece of water by casting and then letting the fly swing. Then taking a couple of steps and casting again. Typically, the presentation is with a natural swing. At times, twitching the fly can bring a reluctant fish to the fly. Sometimes, especially when the fly enters slower water, stripping the fly will do the trick. There are many types of takes. There will just be a pull, a solid stop. I have my drag set fairly low with the line coming directly off the reel, with my finger just touching the line for a feel of the take. I just tighten and lift. Sometimes the take can be more violent. With a low drag set and feel of the line, you can avoid being broken off. Sometimes you'll just get a light tap, or like your fly has just touched a blade of grass. That might be especially true when using a tiny fly. You wait, see if it tightens with weight as the fish turns. If not, wait a bit and go back to it with another cast. This is a bomber, undoubtedly the most widely fished dry fly. On several of the incredibly clear rivers of the Gaspe Peninsula, many times we're fishing dead drift dries to sighted fish. Depending on the depth of the water, typically we'll land a fly 2 to 3 feet above the fish, and if he doesn't take it as it drifts over him, we'll pick up and cast again. There are many types of dead drift takes. If he slashes at it, he's a candidate. Sometimes he'll take it straight forward. Sometimes he'll chase it. Sometimes it's just a subtle take, like a trout sipping a midge, and sometimes it can be pretty dramatic. Sometimes it takes many drifts before a fish takes. Fishing with Renee, I had many drifts over this fish. Renee said, let me go back and get another fly. She's just not interested. The fish took right after he turned around to get another fly, and I replied, okay, but first let me remove this fly from her mouth. He never saw the take. At 28 pounds, she was the largest fish I've taken on a dead drift dry fly. My largest on a waked fly is 32 pounds. These are flies that leave a wake on the surface when they're swung. First encountered by Lee Wolf in the 30s while fishing Portland Creek in Newfoundland, he noticed the local fishermen did well with wet flies that waked in the surface. They did this by tying a couple of half hitches around the shank at the head. Lee eventually named it the Portland hitch. This is a small plastic tube fly with the leader coming out of the side to make it wake. This little fly with a size 10 double hook took the largest fish one week in Russia. She was 44 pounds. When fishing wakers, you adjust the casting angle depending on the speed and complexity of the current. And as you can see, it can be a pretty exciting way to fish. Finally, although on this pass the fly is just under the surface, got him. When it comes to setting the hook, it depends. Much of the time, the fish does it. It's automatic, especially with a wet fly and a hitched fly. First-time trout fishermen often strike as soon as they see movement to a dead drift dry fly, and they take the fly away from the fish. You should wait for the fly to disappear. When asked, expert Canadian dry fly angler Mike Crosby just says you wait till he wraps his lips around the fly. The British have long felt that when a fish takes, you just say, God save the Queen, and that's long enough of a delay for the fish to take, turn, and be well hooked. That can be especially true in the fall as spawning approaches. Males develop kypes, and they can't completely close their mouths. You wait for the fish to turn before setting the hook. As far as equipment goes, I use my single-handed rod primarily for dry fly work, but many people fish them all the time. Switch rods are lightweight and offer the flexibility of using both single or double-handed casts. Double-handed rods give you some great options. You can fish them by overhead casting or spey casting, and they give you a lot of benefits, especially with line control and mending. There are many kinds of spey casts, but they always have these two things in common. The back cast is always under the rod tip, and there's an anchor, where the line touches the water before the forward cast. Their advantages include casting where there's little or no room for back casts, great line control, they're much less tiring than single-handed casts all day, and they can give you great distance. Traditional casts using mid and long belly lines use a kiss-and-go anchor where the line briefly touches the water. There's very little stripping as the angler is usually casting the length of line that he's fishing. For longer casts, you can shoot line. Scandinavian casts use shooting heads followed by a running line. Scandi casts also use a very brief kiss-and-go anchor, but here you must strip in line until you reach the head, because that's really what you're casting. You're always casting the same length and weight of line. You just add distance by shooting. Skagit casts use a heavy shooting head developed in the Pacific Northwest for fishing heavy flies and sink tips for winter steelhead, as the fish usually hold pretty deep. Here the anchor is on the water a long time, a sustained water anchor that allows for casting all this additional weight. And like Scandis, you must strip to the head. We use many styles and sizes of wet flies, from tiny ones to flies over 4 inches. Tube flies offer a number of advantages. One great advantage is using small hooks that hold really well. That's especially beneficial as large flies on conventional hooks can work loose, and the fish gains leverage as the fly swings back and forth. Here are various dead drift dries and different styles of wakers, using both conventional hooks and tube flies. Whatever we use, these are exciting, beautiful fish that we carefully release so they can continue on their journey to complete their natural cycle and return again and again. My presentation wouldn't be possible without the help and generosity of a number of friends. Topher Brown and his extraordinary book, Henrik Mortensen and his amazing videos, the Three Amigos with their wonderful spey casting video, Glenn Legrand of Camp Bonaventure and Salmon Lodge on the Gaspé, Justin McCarthy of the Atlantic Salmon Reserve in Russia, a couple of illustrations from Lee Wolf's book, wonderful photos from the gorgeous salmon book, the bomber photo from Matt Harris and the spawning salmon photo from Paul Nicklin, and the migration map from the Atlantic Salmon Federation. Thank you.